Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the third season of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I am Vlad, and my guest today is Jeremy. And Jeremy might have spoken in class today, like in that Pearl Jam song. Did you speak in class today, Jeremy?
Oh my goodness, I get that all the time, all the time.
Really? That's the only Jeremy that I know because I'm from Romania. And it was a hit song around the time when I was born.
I see. Yes, that would make sense.
And I don't know why that is, but sometimes we get fascinated by the stuff which was popular around the year when we were born.
Yes.
But you're much older than me and you're retired, right?
That's right. 38. I live in Seaside, Oregon, and spend my days alternating between the beach and kayaking and playing around on Twitter and trying to test out the latest Bitcoin software.
Interesting. How does it all mix together? Like when you think of a retired lifestyle and you're going to the beach and you're trying to relax, but at the same time, you're interested in the technology of the future.
I see myself as an amateur researcher in the space broadly. I feel like I've been that way for over 20 years. I've been excited and interested in the concept of digital money. So it's really just a lifelong passion for me, and it's very rewarding to see all of the trends start to come together and really see the applications taking off. And for the first time in my lifetime, I feel like we'll be able to see the culmination of all of this great work that's been done over the last several decades. And that's very exciting to me.
Really? So when you mentioned that you have been interested for 2 decades, were you involved or did you own any DigiCash or eCash by
No.
David Tom?
No, I first became aware of the concept of digital currency when I was in the Army in 1998, and it was part of a program that we were studying. There were some individuals who had left the United States from Texas. They were expats, and they went to Costa Rica to create this. This project they called the Digital Monetary Trust, which, if I were to describe it today, I would say it's something like a proto-privacy coin based on a account model instead of a coin model. It was designed to be wealth secured through cryptography, and it was an interesting project, and it opened my eyes at the time to the possibilities of what a supranational currency would look like and how it would function. Of course, it had many shortcomings that wouldn't be solved until obviously Satoshi released the white paper. But it was still a fascinating topic, and I watched with interest many of the different projects in the interim. But it wasn't really until after Bitcoin started to gain some traction that I made any sort of monetary position in the space.
Interesting. I was not aware of this project. And usually, when you study the history of digital money, especially the one which is cryptographically secure,
Sure.
you end up stumbling upon DigiCash and David Tom and his work.
Sure. Of course.
In academia, but nothing relating to military stuff.
Oh, no, it wasn't military. I was in the military. These guys were completely, they were very eccentric, let's put it that way. The gentleman that was the driving force behind the project, his name was J. Orland Grab. He was an economist from Texas originally, and amateur cryptographer. And he and a few individuals got together and tried to create a digital version of Sealand. And they made a long-term lease agreement with the government of Costa Rica for a plot of land where they could put some computer servers and create this digital community. They called it laissez-faire city. It was truly an interesting place. It was like a bulletin board forum, and you would create an avatar, and you would join the community. And it's funny, the conversations that would happen there are the same kind of conversations that you see today. There would be threads on eating meat and Austrian economics, and it's just really fascinating how some of those things repeat through history. But at any rate, it started off as an attempt to find a way to provide sovereign individuals with a way to store and use their wealth outside of the national communities. And so it quickly devolved, however. I don't think that there was a lot of technical merit behind the cryptography being used. It never deployed successfully. And it quickly became a sort of scam territory where they were really just trying to raise money from high net worth individuals around the world trying to escape taxes and whatnot. And that's why the military was interested in studying it. We had a anti-money laundering and counter-drug beat throughout Central and South America. So that's how it kind of got on our radar screen. But like I said, the project never really took off, but just the sheer fact of its existence was fascinating to me, and I've never really lost that fascination. So when Bitcoin came along, it was really like pulling together all of these threads that had been happening over the course of many years, and it got me very excited, and that's why I'm here today.
So were you still in the military when you first heard about Bitcoin?
Oh, no. I was discharged shortly thereafter, and have been a civilian for the last, I don't know, 17 years or so.
And how would you describe Bitcoin differently from that proto-crypto project from the 90s?
Well, certainly they're the completely different structural arrangement. Obviously, the concept of having a cryptographic token that is exchangeable was far different than what that project envisioned, which was basically just like a trust account that was protected cryptographically. So there are obvious structural differences, and yeah, I mean, my exposure to it at the time didn't go into the deep technical details. That was sort of above my station at the time. I was more looking at it from a behavioral intelligence point of view, and trying to understand the people involved and the dynamics socially of the group. But in that way, it's actually quite similar. So there are some remarkable trends, like I say, that last beyond the years.
That's fascinating. And I hope none of the information that you disclosed is classified and will get you into trouble.
No, of course not. It was it was never any sort of technical operation. It was more just gathering intelligence and trying to understand the world. And plus, it was 20 years ago.
Right. So as somebody who has worked against projects that were trying to launder money, how can you actually like Bitcoin? Because if you're malevolent, you can actually launder money with Bitcoin.
Oh, certainly. And I will say this, my views about how the government should work have changed drastically over the years. When I was a young buck at the time, I had Star Spangled Eyes, and I had this idea of the world as, a place that could be led by a forward-thinking and just government. And in many ways, I felt like that was the only possibility was for the United States government to fill that role as the sort of leading light of the world. And when I went into the military, I was able to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit and understand the inertia of huge bureaucracies, to understand the challenges with executing, the Monroe Doctrine throughout the Americas, and just sort of establishing, hegemonic power throughout the world. These were issues that I hadn't considered fully at the time, even though, I was very much interested in the philosophy behind it as well. I mean, in high school, I read Human Action. I read all of Ayn Rand. I read all of these texts that circled around the core ideas. But over the last 2 decades, my opinions have changed, and I certainly don't think that there should be the oversight between government and currency. I think that money and state should be separated, and I see Bitcoin as being the only real capable tool that can accomplish that goal. And that's why I'm excited about it.
So when was the first moment when you got involved into Bitcoin? Because I guess you hear about it on the news a lot,
Sure.
Especially thanks to the Silk Road. But then you decide that you want to go full time and research this after a while. And when was that moment? And I don't mean specifically the year or the month, but the event that drew you into it.
Yeah, no, it was, I'm happy to tell you, it was somewhere in the latter part of 2012. I'm sure that I came across an article, perhaps in Bloomberg or Fortune or some sort of mainstream media like that, talking about Bitcoin, and recognized it for sort of what it was, not necessarily that I was able to pull together all the pieces. In fact, my learning journey around Bitcoin is still ongoing, and I suspect it will continue to develop for the rest of my life. But I heard about it then and started doing my research. But, when at the time, there weren't a lot of really good options to sort of play around with it. You still had a world dominated by Mt. Gox and that whole situation. And it wasn't really until Coinbase started accepting accounts that I was able to set one up and make my first transactions and really try to see what the technology was all about. I enjoyed it, but I didn't see the possibilities for being anywhere near something that could be happening within a lifetime. I thought to myself, this is fun, this is exciting, this is what it's supposed to be, but I had a lot of doubt about whether there would be adoption of any significant amount, for decades and decades and decades. But I continued to play around with it. I was at that point an entrepreneur, and I utilized Stripe, had a plugin that you could put onto your website that allowed you to accept Bitcoin payments with Coinbase as sort of the backer. And by 2014, I was accepting Bitcoin payments for businesses, but I still had zero clue about the technology and why it worked and the how. It wasn't until 2015 or so that I ran a full node and just barely started poking the software a little bit. And, the story goes on to 2017. I liked it so much that I decided to open Seaside Crypto, was the little shop here in Seaside that is just a little trailer on the side of the road, and I put a Bitcoin sign on the side of it, and so people driving up Highway 101 coming into this little resort town see Bitcoin on the side of the road, and I'd get a lot of people that would just pull in and be very, very confused. And why are you here? And what is it that you're doing? And tell me a little bit more about it. And I had fun with those conversations. But it was more of a novelty, I think. And within the first year, that sort of died off. People had gotten their fill of kicking the tires, and so I decided that it didn't make sense to keep that going anymore. And now I'm just playing around with the newest releases of everything and trying to stay up to date as best I can. But I tell you, it feels like a full-time job. I don't feel retired at all.
I know exactly what you're saying. I have to research the latest developments, and I basically report stuff for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it feels overwhelming, especially right now with Lightning. There are so many developers working on so many interesting projects that there is only so much you can read about at one time.
Absolutely. I absolutely feel that. And, for me and for my sanity, I've really had to restrict it down to, let's say, 6, maybe 7 software programs, right? Obviously there's, Bitcoin Core, which you've got to run, you've got to understand how that works. If you are customer facing or public facing in any sort of way, any sort of business, you've got to do PTC pay server. So you've got to figure out how to, install that and get it going. Another one would be Wasabi. You've got to understand how Wasabi Wallet works, how CoinJoin works. I think BISC is a very important software program as well, because for at least the next 10 years, you're going to need to have a way to shift in and out of fiat currencies. Obviously, the Lightning Network as a set of softwares is very, very important. I have only really experienced C Lightning and LND. I don't know much about Eclair and whatnot, but I try to stay abreast of that. And obviously, finally, Liquid. Liquid is something that has captured my attention recently. It's now easy enough that a dummy like me can install it. And I even issued my first token the other day. I'm very proud about that. And I'm just now kind of seeing in my own mind the possibilities for that. And I think with focusing on those 6 core softwares, and if you were to add another one, I would give a shout out to Samourai Wallet. But if you were to take those softwares together, I really do think you can make you can make a business structure that has all of the benefits and the conveniences of a modern corporation, and do it in a Bitcoin native way. You can add your legacy payment system on top of that as a sort of afterthought, so that you can still deal with your local fiat currency. But if your software stack comprises those pieces of software, you can really make a go of the thing. And so my recent passion has just been trying to find the easiest way to get all of those softwares working on one cheap device, and where possible, seeing what you can do to make the user experience of using that a little bit easier. But that's where my head's been at, and I have to leave it at that. I don't think I can take on another software program. So if there's somebody out there with a new thing, leave me out of it. I can't handle it. My brain doesn't have enough room.
Well, at least you did not get into variation of the Bitcoin Core client.
Right.
I know that people like Luke Dasher are running their own version.
Yeah, knots and whatnot. Yeah. No, it's too much. It's too much. Let me just have the plain vanilla deal and learn how to use that. I think that that's probably good enough advice for anybody. Is get a comfort level with just the basics, and all of this other stuff. I honestly think the troubles and the technical difficulties will ultimately be abstracted away, and the person who discovers Bitcoin for the first time 10 years from now is going to have so much of an easier time with the entire process that it won't even seem like the same technology. At least to my mind, that makes sense. They may have just one app that they put on their phone that does all of those things that I just talked about. Who knows what comes? But certainly, on the one hand, I'm jealous of them, but on the other hand, I'm happy to be tinkering around with it and learning, and I think that part of it is fun as well too.
I think that all of us, through our experiences, are helping the development and helping the interfaces get better and friendlier. And it is through our demands that this interface gets shaped conceptually. Because it's a new technology, we don't know really what we need and what we want. We know what would be cool to have, but we need to test these features before they actually have a commercial phase, which allows anybody to just run an application on their phone and access all the functions. Also, we need to reach that kind of legislative situation or agreement with the corporations that control our data, that they do not ban all the Bitcoin and Lightning related applications from their app stores. Because we haven't seen the worst of it yet, but we can see how with other applications such as social media platform Gab, they keep on banning. And
honestly, I mean, not to interrupt you, but I wish they would do that. I truly do. I know that that's a bit reactionary, and some of my peer group in the community would say, no, don't invite that kind of attention at this point. But I do believe that it would push development to the edges where I think it needs to be. If we had a situation where we couldn't use iOS or we couldn't use Android, then who knows? Maybe there would be a much stronger demand for technologies like the Librem phone. Or versions of Ubuntu on mobile devices that people have been playing around with for a while. Linux on mobile would be a really nice thing to have, and if we push development in that area, I think we would ultimately have a more stable foundation upon which to build. Because as long as we stay within the walled gardens of what Google or Apple says is okay, then we're always going to have a situation where we're locked in a cage with a bear. And right now the bear doesn't seem to be doing anything, but who knows what happens in the future. So I'd rather get out of the cage early, but that's just me. And I understand that might not be a popular viewpoint.
I can imagine that some people will not like the idea of buying a separate device just to be able to use Bitcoin. They will try to use it on their iPhones, and they will be curious to play with the functions. And that's why we need this kind of balance, because maybe in our case, we will be able to manage and use a different operating system and a different app store, which allows us to use our beloved technology. But if we want to really expand beyond this, objectively speaking, echo chamber that is the Bitcoin space, we need to make it accessible. And that's why I like people who make efforts like Pierre Rochard with his node launcher.
Of course, yes. Very, very exciting.
It's so easy. You just double click and it's all there.
Yeah.
Well, it's more difficult if you need to open ports and you need to access your router, and then you have to contact your ISP probably to allow you to open certain ports that allow you to run Lightning. But other than that, it's such a seamless experience.
And, for what it's worth, a lot of the software programs that I mentioned are that seamless today. I mean, I'm sure you've played around with it, but for any of the audience that might haven't, Wasabi, you download a file and you double click it. Liquid is not quite there. Lightning Network is with the L&D desktop app. Bisq is like that. You download a file, you double click it. I mean, I'm talking, Apple, Microsoft, and Linux environments. So and the ones like Liquid and Bitcoin Core, it's literally a couple of commands that you put into the terminal. So I do appreciate the fact that the moment you say terminal or command line interface, people start to have their eyes glaze over. But it really isn't as intimidating as a lot of people think. And I know this just from having people come into the shop, or people that I've met through social media here locally in the Oregon community that have said, okay, I'm excited. I want to do this, but I have no idea where to start. And I say, hey, go get a cheap laptop and meet me at Starbucks, and we'll have you going in a couple of minutes. And when they see the process in front of them, I don't think it's nearly as intimidating as they expected in almost every circumstance. So I think we've come a long way, is what I'm saying. And yes, there's more room to grow. And yes, you want to have grandma be able to use Bitcoin super easy too. I do understand that as well. But I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people fear. You have to get outside of your comfort zone a little bit. Try something new. Try putting Ubuntu on your old computer and just playing around with it. You'd be surprised.
I remember the first time I tried Wasabi. I was so shocked because beyond the CoinJoin function, it's such a great wallet. It's everything that a wallet should be. It has all the functions. It's intuitive. It even has that bar which allows you to set fees without typing anything.
Right.
I mean, every wallet should have that. Why could they not figure that out? It's so obvious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that appeals the most to me about Wasabi is the ease with which you can do coin control. And so many other mobile wallets have really fallen behind in that regard. A notable shout out also to Samourai, who lets you do that and label transaction outputs and all those things as well, in a similar fashion to what happens in the core client. And I guess it's really just a matter of this still being the Wild West of the development world. You've got these innovative young people like Adam, and with Wasabi, and they're putting out these features that are cool as hell, and they are going to catch on, and that's why I say 5 years, 10 years from now, you're going to have an app that you put on your phone and it does everything, and it has all of these features, and we're just in that migrating experience right now. So yeah.
We just have to think that about 9 years ago, Hal Finney launched a bounty program.
Yeah, that was before my time.
Basically encourage people to create their own wallet to withdraw a certain amount of Bitcoins, which he set as a bounty. And I think it was Mike Hearn who won it, who at the time was an engineer at Google.
Mm-hmm.
It was also the way through which Peter Willey got involved in Bitcoin, and now he's the most prominent developer.
Yeah, a lot of really smart guys out there. It's nice to see the brightest people on the planet looking around and deciding, what am I going to do with my life? And so many of them are choosing the world of cryptography, but more specifically Bitcoin, and it's very encouraging to see.
You have been around the space since, you said, 2013.
Yeah. Ish.
What did you think about the scaling debate? Because it was such a huge topic. It divided the community in 2017.
Yeah.
It was feeling like it's not the same. We're not as united as we used to.
It was, I refer to the scaling debate and the whole fork situation as, actually, can you still hear me? I see the little icon here has gone off.
No, I muted my microphone because there's a dog barking outside.
Oh, okay. No, okay. So I saw the scaling debates and the fork situation as the last existential crisis for Bitcoin. For me, it was the last hurdle, the thing that I needed personally for me to feel like we're going to make it, and we're going to make it within my lifetime. I was unsure about the results all the way up till August 1st, 2017. That is the day that I chose to open Seaside Crypto because of the lock-in period. I had this feeling that, if for some reason it didn't work, then that's how you kill Bitcoin. If we gave ground on just 2 megabytes, just whatever, then you set yourself up for a scenario where you give ground every couple of years down the road on some new bell and some new whistle that comes out, and that's just the death of the project, because that's creep of your scope and what it is that you're trying to accomplish with the project. So I thought that it could absolutely be the thing that causes me to lose interest and say, well, shit, I'm not going to get involved at this point. But I had faith. I was very much UASF, and I very much hoped that it would work out. I had signed the lease on the place for Seaside Crypto. I had moved all the furniture in. I had the signs ready to put up, and it was literally like I woke up on August 1st, and I was checking Twitter, and I was seeing what's going on and exploring the blockchain a little bit, and everything started to happen for the good, and segregated witness was locking in, and I said, okay, now I feel good. Let me put up the signs and turn on the open sign, and let's do it, because now I don't think there's anything realistically that can stop it. You have to destroy the internet in order to stop it, and even that's probably not going to work at this point too. So yeah, I mean, that's my take on scaling. Is it was the last real threat, and now that it's over, it's sort of the golden age. We can develop in peace, and we can, take advantage of the market effects of everybody else getting involved and excited about it too. So I really see the story of the next several years as being the story of the not so gradual, probably quicker than we expect, adoption of Bitcoin, and that's a good thing.
That's a strange kind of telling the story. Because if you ask the Bitcoin Cash side, they're going to say, oh, no, we stopped the adoption. We prevented merchants from getting into the space. And it's thanks to our stubbornness and unwillingness to change according to market demands that we lost so many partners that were interested in accepting Bitcoin as a mean of payment.
Yeah. Well, I don't follow any of those accounts, so I don't know.
Sometimes I follow them just to stay informed and see what they're up to, because they are very postmodernist in terms of shaping narratives and constantly changing and trying to influence others. I think Roger Ver is a mastermind in this regard. He seems to appeal to a certain demographic of libertarians. He likes to pose as the victim all the time. Like he's weak and he's trying so hard to bring this ideal to fruition. But at the same time, he's very much aware of what he's doing. At least that's my perception of him.
Maybe. I honestly don't give it a lot of thought. There's like I said, the limitation, the bottleneck here is my brain. It's only so big. It's quite tiny actually, and it only has room for just a narrow focus of what's cool and interesting in Bitcoin, and I'm kind of happy with that narrow focus.
It's also interesting that people like Gavin Andresen, who is maybe the de facto leader of the project and has been for many years, he released a proposal, a BIP. It was called BIP 101, and his idea was to just scale it according to Moore's law. So every couple of years you would have a block size increase. And at the time you had exchanges like Coinbase. I think Brian Armstrong tweeted in favor of it. And it seemed a great way to centralize the protocol, to allow the
That's
actors
obviously
got
the
in
point.
very early.
Yeah, that's
To,
obviously the point. It's all about control. Those are ways that you can attempt to exert control over the network, and all of them have to be rejected. There has to be a hard cap limit on supply. There has to be a hard cap limit on block size. Can it be adjusted? Maybe. Who gives a shit? I'm happy with it exactly the way that it is right now. I want a fee market to develop. I want transaction fees on the base layer to be robust enough to provide good security. And that's only going to happen if you just leave the thing the hell alone. If you keep messing with it, you throw the dynamic of the profitability of mining into chaos every couple of years, and that's just terrible for an industry that needs to gain a stable footing, and have that foundation that can last hundreds of years into the future. So in my mind, I reject out of hand all of those ideas and say what we have right now is absolutely adequate. And when you think about any of the possible nice aspects of increasing the block size, all of those niceties you can find with these other types of self-storage solutions, like using the Lightning Network, like using liquid federated sidechains. So I don't see a compelling argument to do anything on the base layer at this point, with the very possible exception of another round with Schnorr and all of that jazz.
To me, it's interesting that we have these developers who are basically the gatekeepers of the protocol. And even though we like to say that everything is immutable and there is no way to hard fork, we have had hard forks in the past. And we have learned some hard lessons about how blockchains should be governed and how Bitcoin should be protected from malicious attacks.
Yeah,
But there is a high amount of trust that we have to vest into these people, and we have to trust their honesty. And
I don't know. I don't know that we do. I mean, there certainly was a time where that was true. I won't debate that. But is it still true today? I don't think that it is. I think that right now you have an environment where there are maybe 100,000 nodes out there in the wild, Bitcoin core clients. Hell, maybe it's bigger now. I don't know. There's just been a lot of interest over the last year. I just don't think they're gatekeepers anymore. I think that there's code that is out there that's available for anyone to run, and any changes to that code are just going to have to go through the most stringent review and acceptance policy that any software program has ever had in the entire history of computers. And that's the challenge that is set for us with something like upgrading Schnorr and getting masked and all these other, like I said, all these other things. So even if it didn't happen, I would be okay with that. I think that where we are right now is functional. I think that we are in a place where we don't have to worry too much about that level of control and that level of gatekeeping, despite the fact that people keep making these accusations about it. I don't see it. But again, just my perspective.
I think it would be a good idea to have more developers. And it blows my mind sometimes when I think about the fact that some people have become millionaires and billionaires by trading Bitcoin, but they're not willing to at least finance a team of developers to work on open source projects, to experiment, to have more talented individuals involved into Bitcoin development. At least make a useful wallet. Wasabi is a project which was created out of love,
right,
for Bitcoin. Right. It's not like you had a company which had an interest to release a good project. It's the same with Wasabi. You have passionate people, not Wasabi, Samourai.
Right.
Also Wasabi, but I mentioned it before. So Samourai also is in the situation where you have people who are genuinely passionate.
Yes. Yes, with high levels of technical ability, high levels of integrity, building the technology that corporate investment never would. You're absolutely right. Those people are rare. The Satoshis of the world are very rare, and when they come along, they should be celebrated, and we should lift them up and hell, build statues in their honor and all of those things. But I draw the line at saying that there's necessarily obligation. I think that you're going to have people that are going to squat and hold on to coin and not spend it. And from a certain perspective, just that activity is also a contribution back into the space. Especially for the first couple of years, if some of these people that had large balances were more open with them and spend them more, it would obviously be downward pressure on the price in the market, and that there's an argument that could be made that they're doing a service by holding. And for what it's worth, I do think that ultimately many of them will take on projects that change the world. And I just say that as a sort of personal feeling from, watching not only Bitcoin, but all of these digital currency initiatives that have happened over the last 2 decades. They're people that get involved because they want to change things. In 2012, 2011, 2010, if you told me that people were saying to themselves, oh my gosh, I'm going to buy a whole bunch of Bitcoin because I'm going to be a billionaire in 10 or 15 years, I would tell you you're full of crap, because maybe there were a handful of people that felt like it was going to happen within that time frame, but that certainly wasn't my experience. My experience was that it was a cool new technology. Maybe it takes off. Maybe it takes until my grandkids are around before it really starts flowing. And then who even knows what price means or matters there, so I don't know. I kind of push back against the idea that there's this mastermind set of individuals that, are massively hoarding this for ill intent and strictly personal gain. I know that's a very popular trope, but I just don't know who those people are. I mean, even the people that are in the space that sort of fit that description, like your Vares and your Ires and your whoever's, they're not hoarding very well. They're doing stupid things like spending money to prop up, do transaction attacks, mempool attacks, prop up the price, do this, that, and the other. And so, I mean, their wealth will be separated from them through a very natural process in a very short period of time. So, even the bad guy villains out there, I don't see them, being that billionaire villain archetype that everybody talks about. But again, just one guy's perspective.
I appreciate people like Jack Dorsey. He got involved publicly around 2018, but once he announced that Cash App would also integrate Lightning payments, and I think it was at Consensus 2018. A few months later, he also announced that he was hiring developers to work on Bitcoin projects, and he had about 3 positions for coders and 1 position for a designer.
Sure.
And that's impressive, and I feel like more people should be doing this.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. But you also have to understand that, I mean, he has a vested interest in doing that. There's an alignment with his selfish motivation of creating a great company through Square to bring a payments technology to the general public that it hasn't had access to. And so that is, I mean, you can look at it and say that it's altruism, but it's not exactly, right. There is an element to it that is self-interested, but it's an intelligently informed self-interest. On the other hand, you have companies like Bitmain who could have been intelligently self-interested, but they were unintelligently self-interested and chose a different path. So I definitely see your point of view there, but I also think that that's how you incentivize these companies to spend money and bring on these open source developers, is to really have them understand that it's not pure altruism. It is you investing in the sort of the brain trust of your company, and understanding that you have to have this knowledge internally in order to take advantage of the cutting edge technology. And we're talking bleeding edge stuff. Stuff happens every single day in this space. There are new articles, new theories, kids you've never heard of that are 15 in Switzerland writing, these theses and uncovering these new possibilities. Like you have to have your eyes on the radar screen, and the best way to do that is through funding open source developers that are responsible for helping put a little bit of the hand on the wheel, so to speak, in the marketplace. And it's that message that we have to get across to the bigger companies in the space. And if they heard it that way, I think that would open their mind to it a little bit, and they would be more open to funding that type of activity. So, all I can hope for is that someone close to them is whispering in their ear and saying that exact same thing.
On this topic, usually, I think it's a popular narrative nowadays that Bitcoin is losing developers to Ethereum just because the community is overly toxic. And have you encountered any kind of toxicity? Because in my experience, aside from the relentless trolling, people are very helpful and willing to explain stuff to you and help you run your own node and
yes
troubleshoot.
That has absolutely been my experience. I have never once, and I guarantee you I have deserved it. I have never once felt a toxic pushback against me asking questions or trying to get involved, even when my questions were patently stupid. And there have been so many of those. I always have felt like someone was willing to take the time to stop and educate me, and if they didn't, then I was met with silence and not toxicity. And I think that's pretty much par for the course with most technical development environments that I've experienced in my lifetime. So I don't know. I don't know who is leaving because of a toxic culture. I think that's just a bunch of malarkey. I think that people, I hear more about people calling each other toxic than I see toxicity. And, you have to kind of question at a certain point, why would you keep saying that? I don't see any evidence of that. And honestly, I think at a certain point, it's just projection. I think it's projection because you've got these developers that are new to the space, and they find a project that someone has sold them a bill of goods about what the technology can do, whether that's Ethereum or EOS or any of these other, I don't even know what projects are out there. I don't care to know. But someone is selling them a bill of goods, and they go inside and they start actually learning and actually trying to put the pieces together, and they they feel disillusioned because at the end of the day, it just isn't working. I see in my feed all of the time, problems with these contracts getting shut down and people losing money and all of that. And if I were in that space and if I were disillusioned, I would probably lash out and project out. And I think that projection takes the form of the toxicity blame game, because there always has to be a bad guy, right? It can't be that I made a bad choice by learning how to develop in Tron.
Yeah, but I guess we also have this influx of SJW culture, with some people feeling offended that the space is mostly masculine and you don't have many minorities being represented. And people argue that years ago it was all pseudonymous and nobody cared what you are, where you came from, what
I
kind
think
of
it's still that way.
background you had. It was all about what you could do and how you could help the whole community flourish.
Yeah, I think it's still that way. I think that if I were to go through the list of the people that I follow, I would wager that there are more anonymous accounts than there are accounts with a professional name attached to them. And some of the most fascinating accounts are the ones that are anonymous. And you know, for what it's worth, you know, I really, I just I push back against the idea uh, of denigrating that approach as being a social justice warrior. I really, really hate that term because, to my mind, social justice is a good thing to fight for. If I were to look through a dictionary and come across the word social justice warrior, I would say Jeremy is a social justice warrior. I think that's good. I think that we have to be aware of the institutional racism and sexism that's just inherent in our culture, and it's a very big problem, and there's no getting around that. But I think that when you try to take the problems that we have as a society and stick them through the pinhole and say, "Oh my God, Bitcoin is sexist or racist," I don't think that it really makes sense because the relationship of the concepts doesn't make sense. Our society is racist and sexist, and Bitcoin is part of our society. It's not a causative relationship, it is a correlative relationship, and there is a significant difference. And for what it's worth, I don't see a lot of that, honestly. I mean, you do have a couple of nutso stormtroopers out there, but they're very much in the minority, in my opinion.
Yeah. Also, I think you mentioned before we started recording that you haven't heard of me before, and I started popping out all of a sudden. I used to be a vampire on Twitter.
Yes, that's, you know, as we've been talking, I've been putting that together.
I used to be
Thank you for saying
a
that.
vampire account, and
Yeah.
somebody told me, I think, yeah, it was Dan Dark Pill. He told me, you're not going to make it in this space and have a successful podcast and be a successful journalist if you use a pseudonym on social media. Just be yourself, do your stuff, and get the proper recognition to actually grow.
Well, I mean, it depends on your definition of success, right? I mean, Blog Digest is fantastic. You know, some of the insights that I have learned from that show back in the day. I haven't really followed anything recently. Were absolutely fantastic, and I think that what Brian and Janine were doing with their relative anonymity gave them an opportunity to really explore some themes and some concepts and hit a little bit harder than I think a lot of these guys with you know, their big names attached to it and, you know, trying to, you know, talk about how many subscribers they have and their revenue and all this, that, and the other. And hey, you know, if that's why you're in it, then fine. But you can be successful socially and not successful monetarily. So, you know, if I were to give any sort of my 2 cents to this to you, that is, you know, be successful for what's in your heart, for what you want to do to the space, and you know, don't worry about any of the other stuff. You find the thing that makes you happy, that gives you joy to educate people and to tackle subjects that other people aren't tackling from a unique perspective, you find that thing. And who cares about the money? Who cares about what someone else might say is your success or not? You're doing a fantastic thing. And in my book, you're successful. And I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it. But yeah.
I think I'm very successful in terms of learning.
There you go. I
I
like that.
talk to all sorts of people with different backgrounds, and I learn so much from them that sometimes I feel like this is a very egotistical project.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you have examples? I mean, obviously, I'm not asking you to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm just saying, what do you mean by that?
I mean that when people talk during podcasts, they use the kind of knowledge which they have acquired over months or maybe years. And it's selfish to be able to absorb that kind of understanding, maybe during 1 hour of conversation. And you get to find out something of which I wouldn't have thought otherwise.
Yeah.
There are so many perspectives on something so simple. It's just digital money.
Right. Yeah, it's good to bring it back to reality check there. And yeah, guys, it is just money. It's fun to talk about and get excited about, but at the end of the day, it is pretty simple. That's a good point.
A good question which I usually ask people is, do you think we are some kind of cult, or do you have any idea if we resemble any of the characteristics of one?
Oh, absolutely. But the question isn't, are you a cult? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? All of every movement throughout history began as a cult. A cult is a culture. It's a shared idea. It's a shared set of values around some externality that that group has to deal with in a certain way. And so in the most bare bones academic way, absolutely, it's cultish. Can cults take on good or bad flavors or attributes? Absolutely, they can, and you should guard against that as much as possible. But just because someone says it's a cult, A, doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, and B, they're probably projecting their own anger around the situation too, because it has a negative connotation to it, right? Cult always means, David Koresh, or those guys with the Nike sneakers and the meteor, whatever they were, and so that's the image that you populate when people use that word, but it's not always the case.
So we're not Charles Manson, but we're special in our own way.
Right, exactly. Special in our own way. It's some more special than others.
It's strange because some people have invented a lifestyle for being into Bitcoin. You're supposed to eat, you're supposed to love the idea of owning guns.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, Bitcoin can become a part of your identity very easily. I feel like it has for me, because I spend so much time with it. But and I'm a gun owner as well, but I don't wear that on my sleeve. I also think that all of these other aspects of culture signaling, whatever you want to call it, whether it's having a certain type of diet or who cares. Everybody's just having fun with this, and it's their own way to create community. It's perfectly natural human characteristic. As the group that is quote unquote Bitcoin gets larger, you will see more of those outgroups form around additional qualifiers like diet and like gun ownership and like in any number of other things. It's just a natural part of culture developing and springing off little baby cultures.
I didn't think about it too much, but it makes a lot of sense. right now we are seeing some kind of homogenization where people tend to go towards one kind of archetype, like the Bitcoin maximalist.
Hmm.
You like Bitcoin that much, you become a maximalist.
Right. Right.
It's hard to tell what a maximalist is
Right.
anymore because people use the label so much in so many different contexts that you can either return to that derogatory article by Vitalik from 2014,
Right.
or you can think of people like Saifedean.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I totally feel you. I've gone to conferences wearing a shirt that says Bitcoin maximalist on it. You know, I have worn that title as a badge of honor in the past. I don't use that particular terminology much anymore just because it doesn't interest me. It's I saw it as like a phase to go through. It was a way to signal to everyone else that I felt like I got it, that I understood the core value proposition of what Bitcoin is. And because I understood that core value proposition, I was able to recognize that the value propositions of all these alternative coins left a lot to be desired. And I think that's part of everyone's journey as they go through that. I think that you hear on Bitcoin Twitter that everyone who sticks around long enough becomes a Bitcoin maximalist. But I don't think that's where the journey ends, because I think that you can go through that to another area where it's just irrelevant. It's just money. And when you get out on the other side of that development pipeline and you realize it's just money, it's important, but all of these other labels and attributes that you put on it are just ways to create drama, create a little bit of friction, create a little bit of movement, create a little bit of life. That's necessary in the early part of culture formation. But after a certain point where, like what you said, you start to homogenize, that friction is no longer necessary and maybe even undesirable. But for me, largely, it just becomes irrelevant, and you focus instead on the technology and how you can start to apply it in daily life, because you still have the situation, no matter what name you put on it, that 10 years from now, we're going to live in a world that uses Bitcoin primarily for the exchange of value, either in combination with lots of different types of software that are built around it, or through some integrated type of software. But 10 years from now, that will be the case. That is not even a question in my mind, but it's obviously not the case now. And so we have the problem. How do you get from A to B? And for me, that's just the practical application of the software that we have in an iterative process where you're not going to get everything right, but let's get the software installed. Let's start using it. Let's create the business flow that you need to have to make this thing work. And in doing so, you'll uncover opportunities and new areas for research and development, and that's how we get to 10 years down the road. It's not necessarily that we stay in the place where we have to put labels on each other 24/7. I don't think that, I mean, like I said, it's important at the beginning when you have competing interests, but as far as I'm concerned, that that argument has been settled. It's been settled in my mind for a long time, but it's certainly been settled in the marketplace very recently. And I'm just very eager to move beyond that particular conversation and start talking about practical application.
I think I understand what you're saying, as sometimes I feel like I should detach from all of this drama and just take some time to better understand where the no-coiners are and what their understanding of the phenomena actually is, where they position themselves. And I know that this is kind of an ivory tower kind of situation where you look at people who don't really understand something which is complex and have been able to grasp to some extent, and that no coiners are under no circumstance any kind of uniform group which requires the same kind of effort and can be labeled as such.
Right.
But I try to understand the mindset of the regular person who works from 9 to 5 and maybe doesn't get much satisfaction out of the kind of living that he or she makes, but at the same time doesn't feel the need to rebel against the system.
Right. Yeah, most people are not rebellious. Most people do what they're told, without a shadow of a doubt. And it's also important to not think of these people as monolith, because they're not. They're wide and varied in their interests and beliefs and ideologies and all of those things. And my 2 cents on it would be that they're going to end up using Bitcoin, and most of them will never ever know it. It's just that their friend at work will tell them about this new app that lets them, do something original and new with money that they haven't been able to do before. Like, for example, creating M of N contracts with their friends and family. And that application is going to be so awesome for them that they're going to say, okay, yeah, let me try out this new app and do these sorts of things, because I want to have, the same abilities that banks have had for their very wealthy customers for many years. If you are a person of wealth or a large business, you've had access to all of these very complicated financial instruments. But the layperson, the regular person on the street, has not had access to those same types of instruments. But they will be open to all on a network that's built on the principles of Bitcoin. And so when people realize that those types of arrangements, those types of contracts are useful in different circumstances, and this new app lets them do that, then they're going to want to embrace that. But they're embracing the functionality, not the technology necessarily that underlies that functionality. So, that's my take on it, because if we think of Bitcoin adoption as printing out, millions of copies of the Internet of Money and distributing it to everybody, that's fine on a very superficial level. But not everybody is going to A, understand, or B, be convinced by these types of ideological arguments. They simply want functionality that they haven't had access to. And, I gave that example of the multi-signature contract, but it might just be access to the simple function of a checking account that a billion people around the world don't have. So, like I said, I don't think it's about Bitcoin per se. I think it's about gaining access to a particular function of money that you haven't had access to before. And for some people, that function might be censorship resistance. Maybe the person is, the Silk Road type, or maybe an independent journalist in a hostile country, or who knows. So censorship resistance is a very important functionality for the transfer of money that was an original use case. But it will be these other use cases that drive adoption, and not necessarily education around the subject. And that might be an unpopular opinion within some circles of the Bitcoin community. But again, it's just my 2 cents.
Do you ever think of Bitcoin as a geopolitical mean which works against the foreign interests of the United States of America?
That's a heavy question.
I know. I think about it at night sometimes, and I basically frame it as, by supporting Bitcoin, am I actually helping Russia or China?
Well, I mean, by supporting cash, are you helping Russia or China? By supporting gold, are you supporting Saudi Arabia? It's I don't know. It's hard to link those two things in my mind, because it's more primal than that. It's me having a store of value that I can use the way that I want to use it, or maybe in this new fancy way that the technology lets me do. And any other consideration, like who it helps or doesn't help, is kind of secondary, with one exception. I'm glad that it doesn't help the traditional legacy banking system. I'm fantastically excited that it doesn't help Wall Street and the ruling elite and all of that aspect of this is very much revolutionary in that regard. So I'm more focused on who Bitcoin doesn't help than who it helps.
Yeah, that's interesting. But we have seen that tweet by Donald Trump a couple of days ago.
Oh yeah, I saw.
It was the
Yeah, no,
first time a US president mentioned Bitcoin on Twitter or in writing. I guess Barack Obama made a speech once and spoke about the dangers of a Swiss wallet in your pocket,
right.
a
No,
Swiss bank account in your pocket. I think that was the narrative at the time.
Yeah.
But with
Yeah.
Trump, it's right now, I think it's all about positioning US dollar as the hegemonic currency of the world.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously that's already game over, right? I mean, take Bitcoin out of the situation completely, and the U.S. dollar is no longer in control. It's no longer the reserve currency. You have multiple huge economies doing deals outside of the realm of the dollar today, and for the last while, I don't have the specific dates, but to say that Bitcoin is playing a role in that is, I think, a little disingenuous, because the reserve currency status of the dollar has already been lost. If you ask me, we lost it in 1971, but it's just taken a while for everybody to figure out. But yeah, there's no relationship, I think, right now between the United States losing its status and Bitcoin. I am glad that Trump said what he said. I would have been very concerned if he tweeted and said, "Hey, I really like Bitcoin." That would not have been a good situation at all. We wouldn't have stopped hearing about that for quite some time. So I'm actually very thankful that he just kind of put it on the radar screen for a lot of people, and they'll at least understand the positioning of Bitcoin in relation to its ultimate proposition, which is being a sovereign currency. So he actually helped quite a bit by putting Bitcoin on the same pedestal as the dollar and as all of these other currencies, implying that they were somehow competing within the same space. And that's really the eye opener that a lot of people need, is just to understand that it's there, that's what its purpose is. And then the education comes later if they want it. You can dig into it. You can go down that rabbit hole. But even if you just were Jane Doe walking down the street and you saw that tweet, now you've got it in the back of your mind, and it becomes part of the zeitgeist, and that's a good thing, in my opinion.
It's interesting that you're part of the military,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow you're not that hardcore patriot who supports his country. And
oh, I was 100%. I when I was very, very young, when I was a teenager, I considered myself an anarchist, straight and narrow, very ideologically defined. And then I decided that the reason why I felt that way is because there were systemic problems with how we are governing ourselves, and I wanted to do what I could to right the ship. And I felt like the best way to do that was to do it through the command and control structure of the United States Army. I had a plan and everything laid out, but I quickly learned that I was wrong about that as well, and took the best of both worlds, I guess, and started to create my own view of patriotism. If you asked me, Jeremy, are you a patriot? I would say yes, I am a patriot, in the sense that I want America to be a light for the world, a place where you understand that you have freedom and democracy. And unfortunately, in many cases, that just seems to be less and less true. And that's very sad to me. So, am I a patriot? Yes, but a bit of a sad one, to be perfectly honest with you.
So you're not a patriot in the meaning conveyed by the military, maybe, which means that
Yeah,
you support your country at all costs, no question asked.
yeah. So I took an oath, to protect and defend the Constitution, and I have, to this day, a strong admiration for the ideas of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I think that the way that we crafted our government here is the pinnacle of human thought and action in the world of governance. I think that we've slid quite a long way from that original goal. But I do still believe in those ideals. Yeah, no. So I, I I would say that I have that feeling, but it's informed by more years of experience.
I think we have some similarities in this regard, as my background is in political science. I went to university, I did it. I was basically taught that everything should be done through policy, through the state, through legislation, and stuff like that. And the only way to change stuff is to get involved into politics, join a party, or run as an independent, and basically become part of the establishment and try to maintain your pure ideals all the way to the top, which seems to be kind of impossible for reasons that individuals who do maintain ideals don't end up getting to the top.
Right.
That's a reality which you discover later.
Yeah.
But I came to this, I guess, crossroad where you can either become part of the system and part of the establishment and try to change it from the inside.
Right.
Assuming that you will keep the same ideals and you will not just give in and become numb to all the issues. Or you can try to change it from the outside by embracing something which pushes your own government to become more accountable, more transparent, to actually care for you. When you're basically telling your government that you're not using their money anymore, then that should ring the alarm. You should be shocked and say, well, what can we do for you? Because we want to remain legitimate. We want to govern. So if you don't acknowledge our power over you, then we can either use force, which is going to work against us in the long term, because governments usually create martyrs who are remembered over the years, or we can negotiate. And personally, I hope for that situation where we're going to negotiate with our governments and once again establish that social contract.
I see it as putting the idea of currency into a marketplace. The word currency is interesting to me because you can have all types of currency, right? You can have hard currency in the sense of money, but you can have social currency among your peer group or the general public, for example. And currency in that sense means what you are able to do because someone acknowledges the value of what you have to say, or the value of the token or the promise that you're expressing, right? So that's kind of more to the core of what the word currency means. And if you have a situation, let's say in the social setting, where you don't have a marketplace for social currency. You're just simply told, well, here's Joe Blow, and you have to give him all of the social currency, and just listen to him, at any cost. Maybe he's the king or some sort of autocratic ruler trying to dominate social currency. If you prevent a market from springing up around the idea of social currency, I think that you are manipulating the market, and that will always end badly. And I think the same thing is true with currency in the sense of hard money, of the expression of value. If you don't allow currency to exist in a market, you are manipulating that market, and it will always end badly. It may take 100 years, but it will ultimately end badly. And the longer you push it down, the harder the explosion is going to rock you back. That's kind of the way that I see it. So you just have to let currency compete in the marketplace. And that's what Bitcoin does.
Yep. To me, sometimes it's scary. I think about what our world is going to look like if we have a deflationary currency, which has a lot of whales. And it makes me wonder, do these people have any kind of morals, and will they be able to donate to the poor and say, we want to also decentralize the ownership so that you don't have this kind of scenario where 1% of the owners hold most of the wealth? Or are we going to replicate the same system but with a deflationary, objectively superior currency?
Yeah. Are we moving into a new digital feudalism? Right. It's a great question. I think that there's the possibility that happens, but I would say that most of those scenarios involve a lack of government in the form that we have today. And this is where I differ from a lot of people in the Bitcoin space when they view Bitcoin as a nation state killer, or completely destroying the ability of the nation state to exist. I don't think that's the case. And I don't think that's the case because there's nothing about having a hard money detached from the state that prevents the state from taxation. Right? It can be very difficult if you're trying to do things like sales tax or income tax, because the technology might allow you to blind transactions or to completely obfuscate what you're attempting to do in a financial system. But you can always have a tax on real estate, for example. So if I wanted to buy a house in a city, that city can very easily say, you can have this house and you can live in this house, but you have to pay X number of Bitcoin every year as tax on the land and on the structure in order to fund the city government so that it continues to operate. And the same is true on a regional, state, and national level. And the idea of that not being able to happen, I think, is juvenile and uninformed. And so you still have a scenario where you can have government that issues taxes, it's paid in Bitcoin, but it has to take a form, I think, that's more fair and more progressive. And tax on land would be exactly that. It's not a new concept. It's a concept known as Georgism, which any of your listeners can go and Google. It's just the concept that there's lots of different types of taxes, but under a system of Georgism, you only have taxes on land and perhaps tariffs. It kind of depends there. And many noted conservative economists, like Alan Greenspan and others, have opined that, the land tax is the least terrible of the taxes. That wasn't Greenspan. That was somebody else, and the name is escaping me right now. But regardless, that's the concept. So if you have a government and it is being funded, it can still act in a way that's geared towards the good of the population and have a social welfare program. There's nothing that means that those two scenarios are mutually exclusive, right? You can have a hard money not controlled by the state still have a state, still have taxes, still have a social welfare program. And honestly, in that scenario, I think that's sort of like the best of both worlds, right? We have stability in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our states, and whatever. And we also have the benefits of our currency floating on the market. So I recognize the neo-feudalism argument or scenario as a possibility when governments can break down and there's no centralized control or no sort of internal defense force or police force. But I think that's, all things being equal, a relatively unlikely scenario. So I'm hopeful.
Let's hope for the best. And
Indeed.
let's hope that the ideals which led to the creation of Bitcoin will be implemented in a post-Bitcoinization world.
Right.
I guess the people who got in early are also the ones who own most of the coins.
It's speculation. I mean, who knows? Personally, I think most of those old addresses, I don't know if I would say most, but a lot of those old addresses are burned. I know I've heard, estimates ranging 3 or 4 million Bitcoin burned, and that might be the case if you were to do an audit right now. But consider 10 years from now. I think that 10 years from now, over half of the addressable Satoshis in the Bitcoin network will be effectively inaccessible. And I feel that way because of one just sort of true aspect of human nature. Not everybody prepares for the future. Today, about 40% of all of the people who die without a will. And those numbers are higher within the African American and Hispanic communities and other communities of color, but all across the board, you're about 40%. And if someone dies today without a will, it's not necessarily a big deal. You go down to the bank and you show them the death certificate, and the bank officials, scratch their heads and they send it to their boss, and somebody puts a stamp on it, and eventually they release to you the balance that was in your dead relative's account. And that's all fine. Obviously, this is not possible with Bitcoin. And that 40%, I will say, does tend to skew towards the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, but still 40% is a hell of a lot. And while the average person might only die with $300 or $400 or $500 or so worth of money today in a deflationary world where savings is incentivized, that number is likely to be higher. However, the basic human nature of not planning for the future and not writing a will and having an intestacy where you're able to pass that wealth securely to someone else, that's just not going to change. That's just human nature. So when you think about it, every year, 40% is kind of, or however you want to work that out math-wise, that's being taken off the table. So you have that aspect of it as well, that's a pressure against long-term aristocratic accumulation of wealth, right? And I could go further and say that, that feudalism environment that we were talking about earlier, where you do have an aristocracy that lasts and persists, I actually think is unlikely in a post-Bitcoin world, because to my mind, aristocracy requires inflation. I don't think that aristocratic families and groupings of these powerful individuals can persist over generations without a tool as powerful as inflation to sap wealth and resources out of a population. That's the reason why we have it. So if you take away the ability to suck up wealth from the entire populace through inflation, I think you make it much less likely that you can have these long-lasting dynasties of families and whatnot. And I do think that obviously we're getting a little bit cosmic here, right? We're talking 10, 20, 30 years down the road. But I do think we do reach a more egalitarian distribution of resources. But I have no evidence to point to that other than my own speculation. So take that with a grain of salt.
I think that wills will be replaced by multi-sig contracts. Maybe. Where you hold one part of the private key, you give one part to whoever you want to inherit your wealth when you die.
Right.
And then that third part will be given to the bank. And in this case, we can think of examples like Casa, who already do this. They hold one part of your private key. And there is no way for them to access your funds without the consent of, at least, I think they do 2 out of 3 and 3 out of 5.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that'll definitely happen. And, 60% of the people will take advantage of those kinds of arrangements. There'll always be people who won't. So that will always take, Satoshis off the table. But it would be interesting to see. One of the things that I like to study and read about and fantasize about trying to actually make are really long-lived organizations. How do you create a multi-signature contract that has a meat space governance aspect to it that can survive 300 years? Because a 2 or 3 just ain't going to cut it, right? At some point, along the line, someone's going to take that and abuse that. So how do you implement strategies and governance over that particular wallet so that it can last for a long time, and maybe give it a mandate, like the way these charitable foundations exist today. They have a mandate to accomplish a certain thing, and they hire a board, and there's these directors, and they vote on the stuff that they want to do, and they can't just spend all of it. So you've got precedent for those types of organizations, but they have been able to exist relatively easily because our legal structure is very subjective, and you can just go to the judge and say, well, judge, this is how we think it needs to be. And obviously there's no judge in Bitcoin except for the blockchain itself. So actually taking the time to think about what those contracts look like, how you implement them in the real world, that's something that fascinates me. I have absolutely no idea how to do it. But I think that ultimately smart people will figure that out. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. I don't think I am qualified enough to speak on behalf of these smart people. We'll figure it out.
Same. Cheers.
But we are both observers of the phenomena.
Indeed.
And I hope we will be around for at least 30 years more.
Yeah. I gotta walk more, do some sit-ups, and make sure that I eat right. But yeah, I'd like to stick around for 30 years. That'd be nice.
Before I got into Bitcoin, I used to tell people that I want to live long just to be able to see if aliens exist, if we are able to invent teleportation, or time travel, or space exploration for tourists.
Yeah. Oh, I want the holodeck, man. That's what I want.
But right now, I also want to see Bitcoin in the future.
Yeah. I honestly, I feel like it's going to happen. I think that I think we're on a less than 10-year timeline. It reminds me of a quote from Bill Gates. Actually, he wrote a book when I was coming out of high school called "On the Road," and in the book, he said that people always overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. It's just one of those things about human nature, and I feel like that is a very interesting lens through which to view the Bitcoin community, because we always get very excited about something that's coming, and then when you say 18 months, it's like, oh my god, it's so far away, and so you have this unrealistic expectation on the short term, but I think we also have an equally unrealistic expectation on the long term in the other direction. So Vlad, I think your chances of seeing this thing happen are pretty good.
I'm 27 right now, so
Oh yeah, man.
I
You got
hope I'll get to see it.
for
By the
sure.
way, I looked it up. I know that On the Road is a book by Kerouac.
Oh shit. What did I say? I said
The
on the road.
the one by Bill Gates is called The Road Ahead.
Yes.
But I
Yes.
wouldn't
Thank you.
have known this unless I looked it up. So I'm not a smart ass in any way. I was just curious.
Hey man, you at a certain point you got to give me credit for having the word road in there. So there you go.
I give you credit for also reading Kerouac. I guess it was inspiring
Yeah.
to you.
It got stuck in there somewhere.
It's a book which inspired a whole generation to become nomads and hippies and stuff.
Yes. Yes. Without a doubt. Well, Vlad, it's been fun chatting up with you and getting to know you a little bit better. I'm actually glad that we did this because, like we mentioned at the beginning, I had seen your vampire persona and hadn't, I guess, interacted with it much, but now I have much more of a personality to put to the persona, and I'm very thankful and grateful for that. So thank you for inviting me onto your podcast and letting me dribble out all of my stream of consciousness for all of your listeners. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. And I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Bye.
Oh, wait, Jeremy?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just tell the listeners how they can follow you and whatever you do these days.
Yeah, yeah. So if you don't follow me, the only social media that I'm on really is Twitter. So I'll obviously post out links to this. It's my handle is Jeremy, but I've got a whole bunch of underscores in front of it, 8 to be precise, if you wanted to get down to that. Yeah, so follow me, please. I'll follow you back, and we have conversations, and we grow as people.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Vlad.
I'll publish this in a couple of days.
Wonderful. I look forward to it.
Okay. Bye.